October 20th, 2011, Sirte, Libya. Dawn. Somewhere inside the last loyalist pocket of a dying city, Muammar Gaddafi is moving. 42 years of absolute power have been compressed into a single, desperate calculation. Get out of Sirte before the circle closes. The convoy assembles before sunrise. Pickup trucks mounted with heavy machine guns, land cruisers packed with bodyguards. Armored vehicles carrying senior commanders who know their names are already on NTC kill lists. Roughly 75 vehicles in total, headlights cutting through the coastal dark, engines turning over in a courtyard where a few weeks ago, Gaddafi had still believed he could rally what remained of his military and reverse the collapse. He believed a lot of things that morning that were not true. The most dangerous of those beliefs was the assumption that no one knew he was in the convoy. They did. They had known for hours, and 8,000 meters above the city, invisible against a cloudless North African sky, a machine was already waiting. But the airstrike itself was not even the most important part of what happened that morning. The strike was just the final step in a chain that had been assembling for weeks. To understand why Gaddafi died in a drainage pipe outside Sirte, rather than in exile in a friendly country, you have to go back further than the convoy. You have to understand the intelligence architecture that had been quietly closing around him since Tripoli fell, the specific moments where he made decisions that fed his location directly into the kill chain, and the layers of air power that NATO had positioned over Libya specifically to catch him when he ran. Because the trap was not set on October 20th. It had been set weeks earlier, and Gaddafi had walked into it himself. Sirte was Gaddafi's birthplace. That mattered psychologically. He had retreated to it the way a wounded animal retreats to familiar ground, as though the city itself offered protection that concrete walls and loyal fighters alone could not. By October, that loyalty was eroding fast. Tripoli had fallen in late August. The National Transitional Council's forces had swept east and west simultaneously. Every major city had flipped. The regime's military command structure had dissolved from the top down as generals defected, were captured, or simply vanished. What remained of organized pro-Gaddafi resistance had concentrated in two places, Bani Walid and Sirte. Both cities were under siege. Both were bleeding. And in Sirte's District 2, a shrinking pocket of rubble and burning streets, approximately 2,000 loyalists were holding a perimeter that NTC fighters were compressing by the day. The problem for Gaddafi was not just military, it was geometric. By early October, NTC forces had reached the Mediterranean coast near Sirte and severed the last land corridor. There was no route west to Tripoli, no route east to Benghazi. The southern desert roads were watched. The city had become a container, and the container was getting smaller. His only realistic option was a mass breakout, get enough vehicles, enough firepower, move fast enough, and hope NATO was looking somewhere else when the convoy hit the road. That was the plan. It was not a bad plan, it just had one fatal structural flaw. NATO was specifically watching for it. What Gaddafi did not know, or could not bring himself to believe, was that his own communications were killing him. Intelligence assets operating across the theater had been monitoring his satellite phone use for weeks. Libya is large, its desert vast, its communications infrastructure partially destroyed by months of war. In theory, a man moving constantly could make himself hard to track. In practice, a man who still needed to command, to coordinate, to hold his inner circle together, could not go completely silent. He had to communicate, and every time he did, signals intelligence assets recorded it, analyzed it, and fed the data into a targeting picture that was being updated in real time. A RAF Panavia tornado conducting reconnaissance over Sirte that morning was not there by coincidence. It was vectored into position by intelligence, indicating that the convoy was forming. When the aircraft sensors found 75 vehicles moving at speed out of District 2 before 8:30 in the morning, There was no ambiguity about what the analysts were looking at. The first weapon came from overhead and from an entirely different continent. A United States Air Force MQ-1 Predator drone, controlled by a crew sitting at a ground station near Las Vegas, Nevada, was orbiting over Sirte when the convoy hit the road. The distance from that control room to the Libyan coastline was roughly 6,000 miles. The latency between the operator's input and the drone's response was measured in fractions of a second. To the Predator, geography is an abstraction. It does not care about distance. It watches, it waits, it fires when authorized. The drone engaged the convoy approximately 3 kilometers west of Sirte. The first strike destroyed a single vehicle, jarring, catastrophic for the occupants, but not enough to stop the column. The convoy fractured. Some vehicles stopped, some turned back toward the city. About 20 continued driving south at high speed, pushing hard for what they hoped was open desert and a way out. That decision to keep moving was the last mistake the convoy would make as a tactical unit. French aircraft were already in contact with the targeting network. A mixed flight of a Mirage F-1CR reconnaissance jet and a Mirage 2000D attack aircraft was redirected to intercept the remaining vehicles. The Mirage 2000D released a GBU-12 Paveway 2 laser-guided bomb into the column. The bomb was not designed to kill one vehicle, it was designed to kill everything near it. 11 vehicles were destroyed in the strike. Dozens of Gaddafi's fighters were killed outright. The convoy, which minutes earlier had represented the last organized military structure protecting the former leader of Africa's richest oil state, had ceased to exist as a formation. Burning trucks, bodies on the road, scattered survivors running toward the nearest concealment they could find in a flat, exposed landscape, designed to provide none. And here is where the story becomes something stranger than a military operation. Here is where it becomes something closer to a parable. Muammar Gaddafi, who had once paraded through Tripoli in a gold-plated vehicle, surrounded by an all-female bodyguard unit, who had addressed the United Nations General Assembly for 90 minutes while tearing up the UN Charter in front of the world's press, who had funded terrorist operations across 3 continents, who had personally designed his own military uniform and slept in a Bedouin tent at international summits to project an image of untouchable cultural power, was now crawling through a concrete drainage pipe in a field outside a burning city. Not a bunker, not an underground command post, not a fortified compound, a drainage pipe, approximately half a meter wide, dark, wet, sitting in a stretch of scrubland between a road and an industrial area where the suburban edge of Sirte dissolved into nothing. He was not alone. A small group of bodyguards had made it with him. Some were wounded. All of them were in the same pipe or moving through the same culvert system. The plan, if it could be called a plan, was to wait for darkness and then move. There was no evacuation aircraft, no special forces extraction team, no border crossing already arranged. The man who had ruled Libya for 4 decades had no plan beyond surviving the next few hours by hiding in a tube of concrete under a North African field. NTC fighters from the Misrata brigades were moving through the area, mopping up after the airstrike, clearing the burning vehicles, hunting survivors. They were not yet looking for Gaddafi specifically. They did not know he had been in the convoy. NATO officially maintained at the time that the alliance had struck military vehicles posing a threat to civilians and was unaware that the leader of the loyalist forces was among the occupants. Whether that statement was technically accurate or diplomatically careful is a question military analysts have been debating since. What happened next on the ground was not a precision intelligence directed capture operation. It was a 23-year-old fighter from Misrata stumbling onto something he was not expecting. Gaddafi was found inside the drainage pipe, gun in hand, begging not to be shot. The fighter who found him, a man named Omran Shaban, would later be identified in photographs holding Gaddafi's golden pistol aloft. He had no idea when he crawled toward that pipe that his name would be remembered in connection with one of the most brutal and consequential moments of the Arab Spring. Gaddafi was dragged out. The video that circulated globally in the hours that followed showed what happened next. It was not a clean capture. It was not a formal arrest. It was chaos, violence, a mob closing around a man who had once been among the most protected individuals on Earth and was now being handled by fighters who had spent months watching their cities bombed and their families killed by forces loyal to the man in their hands. He was shot. The exact sequence of events remains disputed. The NTC stated officially that he died from wounds sustained during a firefight when loyalists attempted to free him. Human rights investigators and the video record suggest the reality was more direct. Muammar Gaddafi, his son, was captured separately that day and killed in custody. Abu Bakr Yunus Jabr, Gaddafi's army chief and one of the original Revolutionary Council members from 1969, was also killed. In a matter of hours, the entire surviving apex of a 42-year political and military structure had been destroyed. But the strategic consequences of October 20th extended beyond Libya, beyond Gaddafi, beyond even the question of how a NATO air campaign officially described as civilian protection had functionally become a decapitation strike on a specific individual. The real consequence was the message it sent to every other government watching. No bunker is deep enough. No city is loyal enough to provide cover indefinitely. No communications silence can be maintained when a man still needs to direct the people keeping him alive. Technology does not tire. A drone crew in Nevada can sustain surveillance over a North African battlefield for hours, then be relieved, then resume, continuously, without the biological constraints that limit any human patrol. The kill chain that found Gaddafi's convoy was not assembled in the morning of October 20th. It was a persistent architecture, watching, listening, and waiting for the moment the target decided to move. And that architecture did not shut down when Gaddafi died. The lesson NATO drew from Libya was not a lesson about success. It was a lesson about efficiency. The same integrated SIGINT drone strike model that destroyed the convoy outside Sirte had already been tested and refined in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in Yemen. Libya showed that it could be exported, that a major urban siege, combined with aerial intelligence dominance and a continuous overwatch system, could reduce any static defensive position to a burning vehicle column on a coastal road in under 90 minutes. The question for the next conflict was never going to be whether the model worked. The question was always going to be who was watching the next convoy. Gaddafi feared NATO more than anything else in his final hours. One of the NTC fighters who helped capture him reported that as the former leader was pulled from the pipe, he kept asking the same question. That question had no good answer. And the next dictator watching from a safe distance knew it. What happened outside Sirte on October 20th was not just the end of Muammar Gaddafi. It was the first public demonstration of what integrated aerial intelligence dominance looks like when it is allowed to run against a static target with no air defenses left to challenge it. A satellite phone call, a reconnaissance aircraft, a drone firing from a continent away, a laser-guided bomb, and a man in a drainage pipe. The entire chain from intercept to kill took less time than the convoy had spent on the road. That is the speed the next generation of that system will be running at. And to see how a different set of operators used the same kill chain logic to hunt a different kind of target across a different kind of war, click the video on your screen right now.